Well, for more on this topic, we're joined by Haiyan Wang, Managing Partner at the China-India Institute. Always good to have you on.
Glad to be here.
So let's start with these issues and this argument over intellectual property, with the US initiating Section 301, the investigation last August. Why did they begin the investigation in the first place?
I think that for several reasons. One is President Trump has promised in his campaign trail to be tough on China. At some point, he has to deliver somehow. And the second is certain Chinese American firms did voice complaints about their intellectual property rights not being properly protected in deals with China. So I think that it's both a top-down and bottom-up. And I think that at this point, President Trump is surrounded by hawkish, advisors that he is intent to take on a trade war, or at least a threat of trade war with China.
Now, we saw that Ambassador Sui Tiankai, he said that all these accusations against China when it comes to IP are groundless and discriminatory, and that China is capable in terms of innovation. We've already seen that they're leading the way in the world in terms of the number of patents and intellectual property filings. So what is your take on how the US is viewing this?
I think that U.S. companies, many of them in the high-tech sectors, begin to feel the competitive pressure from Chinese firms. Over the last decade, Chinese firms have invested more in R&D. The country has now put in 2.2% of its GDP in R&D, going higher to perhaps 2.5%. So you have more talents, you have more investment, and of course there are spillovers from high-tech firms, from the foreign companies. So as Chinese companies rise up in their technological competencies, Western firms begin to feel the threat. I think that's just a reality. I wouldn't say that the patent application numbers by itself indicate that China is right up there in terms of China's technological power, because it does take time, but the ambition is pretty clear. As President Xi said, that by 2030, China wants to become a leading global technological power. So innovation is becoming a driver for China's economic development. Now that, some Western high-tech companies see that as a threat, but also, flip the coin, there are also potential growth opportunities for high-tech companies. As China move up the industrial value chain, then they need more cooperative opportunities with Western companies. And then in terms of intellectual regime, I think the intellectual protection laws are pretty sound. And I think that the execution in terms of the actual court dealing with the IP cases will just become stronger.
Now, let's turn to these tariffs. We know that Trump has announced tariffs on about $60 billion in Chinese imports, and China says it's going to do whatever it has to protect its national interests. It's not afraid of a trade war, but it doesn't want one. But they have responded with their own retaliatory measures on U.S. goods. Where does all this take the relationship going forward if things escalate? What does China have in its toolbox?
Well, I think that there are two paths. One is the possibility of escalation. Right now, it's just a lot of war cries. So on the U.S. side, you have 15 days to come up with the specific product lines, on which product lines, what percentage of tariffs will be levied. And of course, China is going to retaliate. But after the 15 days, and then there would be another 30 days for public comments, I'm pretty sure that a lot of the U.S. industrial groups will voice opinions against such stiff tariffs, because in the U.S., the interests are not quite aligned. It's not a uniform voice. Certain sectors, certain industries, certain associations are strongly against trade wars with China because they will suffer. Some districts, some constituencies, some states will suffer more than other states. So in this kind of a win-lose game, it's not very clear who wins, who loses. Some U.S. companies will lose, and some U.S. companies perhaps will gain. But
now this is just the latest that we've seen in terms of trade escalations. We've seen the U.S. block certain mergers and acquisitions, especially when it comes to tech by Chinese companies. You also saw Trump's national security advisor resign and being replaced by John Bolton when when he steps down on April 9th. And he's been very accusatory about China in terms of what it does with intellectual property.
Yes.
Can we glean any policy signals about where this is all heading?
I think that one area I could foresee is that Chinese acquisitions of American firms, particularly in the high-tech sectors, will face a lot more restraints. For sure, I think that FDI, foreign direct investment, both ways, American firms in China and Chinese firms in the US, that will slow down, I think, dramatically. And I think that would probably have a bigger impact than just the trade tariffs, because if we look at the whole trend is moving towards more data flows, and high-tech driven economic growth. So I think that is something that we can foresee, that both ways FDI will decline, or at least the growth will not be as in the past decade.
All right, well, thank you as always. Haiyan Wang, their managing partner at the China-India Institute.